The majority of herd violence in American history has been racially motivated. If you look at the list of incidents of civil unrest in the United States on Wikipedia, a striking number of them are race riots or ethnic riots, usually against minorities. But since the civil rights era, most racial violence has been done by black people, unfortunately.
Hello, base department?
The most obvious example is lynching. This was commonly used against American blacks. The anonymity of Klansmanhoods lends credit to the emergent norm theory. Usually some allegation was made, which led to angry whites getting together and exacting vigilante vengeance. Lynching was a common headline in Southern America until the 1960s. There have been a few cases of prominent mob violence against imprisoned Americans. The most famous one in American history comes to mind is Joseph Smith, also known as the heretical bigamist who founded the Mormon sect, who was arrested for corruption and treason. A group of anti-Mormons in his town, who'd lived under his theocratic rule, couldn't contain themselves and broke into the prison and killed him and his brother. Though uncommon, sometimes mobs hate someone so much that they break into prison to kill them. The ironic thing is he probably would have been executed because he was being tried for treason.
Yeah.
And they had good evidence.
Yeah, if they just waited, he would have gotten what he deserved.
I mean, he was ignoring federal warrants for his arrest. And he was sending away federal agents with his militiamen and stuff. So, as Daniel mentioned with Spartacus, there have been slave rebellions throughout history, but not many in American history, actually. The most famous of which are probably Nat Turner and John Brown. John Brown came to absolute nothing, besides a few of them getting killed. But the fear of widespread slave rebellion kept white slave owners awake at night, and further worsened their treatment of slaves. It really increased the paranoia. It was the nightmare of every slave-owning white person. And Daniel said, but I'll reiterate, the Romans experienced 3 separate slave rebellions in just the Republican era. After that, there weren't any for some reason.
I wonder why. Probably because they cracked down on them so much. I don't know. Or maybe they were just so widespread that it was hard for them to unite. Or maybe it was that the empire was just so benevolent. Nah. Now let's talk about anti-tax riots. The Whiskey Rebellion is a big one, where the new federal government under Washington imposed a tax on distilled spirits to pay off war debt, and some in Pennsylvania violently opposed it. Whiskey was a valuable product and a means of exchange. Opposition to taxation was a foundational idea behind the revolution, and it didn't work anymore. When the soldiers rolled into town, the revolt dissolved. In addition, many events leading up to the Revolutionary War can be described as tax revolts. Shays' Rebellion, which occurred under the Articles of Confederation era, was a revolt against debt and taxes. Labor strikes and related mayhem is another one. First major labor strike in America was the Great Railroad Strike of 1877. I say that labor strikes are only mobs when they resort to violence or continually increase their demands beyond higher wages and unionization rights, for example. I wouldn't go into all the labor disputes that happened in the late 19th century and early 20th centuries, but let's just say that they usually started out peacefully, and the owner's use of violence and strike-breaking tactics often turned it into mayhem. And here's a fun fact. At one point, the private security forces, the Pinkertons, outnumbered the total number of U.S. soldiers. That's impressive. The market finds a way, as the libertarians would say.
Also, just the American government wasn't at war much in that time period.
Yeah, you're right. So they didn't have a reason to have a big army?
Yeah.
So then there's race riots, and there have been a lot of those, most of which were by the KKK and other white supremacists during the pre-Civil War era, the Civil War, and up until civil rights. There was the Red Summer of 1919 when whites attacked blacks all over the country. Hundreds died, but blacks did fight back in some of the major cities. And in 1967, there was the Long Hot Summer, where blacks in America rioted in a ton of cities. And then in 1968, MLK was assassinated, and riots broke out all over Black America.
There have been a few anti-war riots in American history as well. The New York City draft riots during the Civil War were initiated by immigrants against having to fight for black emancipation. That's not what they came here for. That was their opinion. They didn't want to die in the war, they didn't like black people, and they didn't want job competition for the inevitability of all these slaves coming north after the war.
So they were looking out for their own interests.
A lot of these race riots are actually economically motivated. Like the one in 1919 was because the economy took a slump, so they were angry at the black people for taking lower wages than them.
Ah.
There was also a lot of anti-Vietnam violence. culminating in the 1968 Democratic National Convention protests, which really helps Nixon win. Now, there's also political mob violence. The Haymarket Riot of 1886 witnessed a bomb attack on police by anarchists. 7 policemen and 4 civilians died, and this event made America paranoid about anarchism and immigrants. A lot of them were Eastern European. A lot of them had these weird, like, leftist ideologies like anarchism and socialism and all that. The Days of Rage in 1969, this is funny, led by the far left group The Weathermen, was a hilarious attempt by some leftist losers to overthrow the system, but police took care of the few who showed up. They thought thousands of people would show up, only a few hundred did, and there were like 2,000 policemen, so they just mopped them up.
Ouch.
And there's a bunch of like Jewish nerds.
Oh, they
like
were
college kids who'd been radicalized. And anyways, the Stonewall riots of 1969 were riots by gay people. Peaceful riots ensued after Trump's election, of course, and Milo's invitation to speak at UC Berkeley caused a violent protest. Milo Yiannopoulos, of course. In 2017, the Unite the Right rally ended in violence. There's always something going on when it comes to the Israel and Palestine issue, so there's always going to be some kind of violence.
Yes.
Even
sure.
in America. Of course, there was January 6th, 2021, a day that will live in infamy.
Right. Although some might say this might not qualify, I think prison riots are worth mentioning as an example of mob violence. 2 of the most famous prison riots in American history are the Attica Prison Uprising and the New Mexico State Penitentiary Riot. In September of 1971, an estimated 1,000 men of the Attica Correctional Facility in New York rioted and took control of the prison. They took hostages, and they made demands. When negotiations broke down, authorities successfully retook the prison by force, leaving 43 dead. In February of 1980, inmates of the Penitentiary of New Mexico took control of the prison. For 36 hours, the prisoners tortured and killed fellow inmates believed to be police informants, and took 12 guards hostage. 33 inmates were killed in the riot, and hundreds more men, including the guards, were injured due to beatings and rapes. Last but not least, we have police brutality backlash. Rodney King, Michael Brown, Freddie Gray, George Floyd, you know the names. Police are accused of beating or killing a black person without justification, and blacks riot. No comment from us. You can do your own research on the 2020 Summer of Love. Thanks for listening to the Sons of Antiquity highlight reel. To hear this clip in context and to enjoy our full-length episodes, check out the links in the description or search Sons of Antiquity on YouTube, BitChute, Spotify, or Apple and Google Podcasts.